I think the United States can rest assured that the dollar is going to play the dominant role in international transactions, facilitating international transactions, and serving as a reserve currency in the years ahead. I don't see that role being threatened by any development.
Alright, guys, so let's talk about what Janet Yellen just did, because what she just did is extremely dangerous to the dollar. In just a single week, the West has done a lot of damage to the global financial system. Now, seizing Russia's frozen assets was a crazy move, but the real game changer was what just happened. Just before the G7 summit in Italy, the US Treasury came up with a dangerous set of sanctions. The target, of course, is Russia. The US has designated Russia as a full war economy, and this has big implications. By definition, it means that the Russian economic growth is powered by war, which isn't true. However, that's the narrative today. More importantly, it's an act to isolate them even further from the global financial system. And if you're trading with Russia, if you're a country dealing with them, you are directly aiding their economy, which is built on war. Now, obviously, this is part of a plan to eventually punish and contain China. But this scheme is going to backfire badly on the dollar. Over the past few days, we've heard rumors about the Saudis tearing apart the historic petrodollar agreement. Now, here's the truth, that is mostly hysteria. It was more of a mutual understanding than one single document signed by the president and the Saudi king. But what Yellen just did, her new set of sanctions, actually dooms the petrodollar in a concrete way. She ignores the fact that the world still relies on Russia for oil, gas, and other commodities. She has expanded the secondary sanctions to a whole new level. Any foreign bank can be sanctioned for doing business with a Russian company, and this sets an incredible precedent. Behind every transaction is a bank. Whether you're selling machinery to Russia or you're buying oil from them, a bank is nearly always in the middle. Now, these institutions, they provide insurance coverage, they provide credit and trade financing, and that's the international role of banks. Yellen wants to break that link with Russia. So if a country dares to trade with Moscow for whatever reason, Yellen can cut them away from the US dollar system. It's really amazing when you realize she has blinders on even today. This move almost guaranteed a global shift away from the dollar in global trade. When the Treasury announced these sanctions, Russia was forced to make a big pivot. They halted dollar and euro trade on their currency exchange. In other words, the Russian economy has no choice now but to fully de-dollarize. Dollars still account for around 20% of their total trade today, but that will collapse to zero very soon. As a result, Russia is adopting the Chinese yuan or the RMB as the new benchmark for the country. By basing everything using the yuan, Moscow is essentially tying both economies together. A big psychological shift is going to happen. People in Russia will be pricing everything in the yuan and no longer the USD. There's also no going back financially as well. The yuan is essentially the de facto currency in Russia today, at least for foreign trade. Because of this change, transactions in dollars or euros in Russia will become very expensive. If you want to do business with Russia or in the country itself, you need either rubles or the Chinese yuan. Austrian bank Raiffeisen, for example, has stopped all outgoing dollar payments from Russia. Companies in Russia can't send payments in USD out anymore. But that isn't going to cripple their economy. It's just going to shift global trade directly to China. Transactions will be done through China using the yuan. So Western companies that are dealing with Russia are going to get hit financially. They're going to hurt. The real damage is done to Western banks. You can't process any transactions with a Russian company. Your holdings of dollars are also trapped in the country. And after the G7 confiscation of the frozen assets for Ukraine, you can bet all Western assets today are fair game as well. Looking at the assets of Western banks operating in Russia, they are in deep trouble. There's almost $60 billion worth of money stuck in the banks. Because of US sanctions, the banks can't move the money out of Russia either. Putin can nationalize these banks or just take the money with complete ease. Ironically, US sanctions have helped Russia enforce their own confiscation of Western assets, but that's still nothing compared to the harm done to the petrodollar system. Now, when we hear the term petrodollar, the first thing we think about is Saudi Arabia, the kingdom selling oil for dollars and taking the proceeds to buy US treasuries. In a nutshell, that's how the entire system works. But we shouldn't forget Russia is also a big oil producer. In 2023, Russia accounts for over 10% of global oil production, even more than Saudi Arabia. If we add China and Iran into the mix, that's almost 20% of oil price outside of the dollar. Now that Russia has stopped all dollar or euro transactions, the only avenue left is the yuan and rubles for Russian oil. The global majority still buys energy from Russia. To buy and sell oil cargoes, you need a bank as an intermediary. So you can see how this set of sanctions is really self-sabotaging the dollar. Countries that used to pay Russia dollars for their oil have to make a dramatic switch now. They must transact in either rubles or more likely the Chinese yuan. The petrodollar is getting hammered. You don't even need Saudi Arabia to be involved. India, for example, is buying more Russian oil than ever before. Imports have hit nearly 2 million barrels a day in April. Transactions now have to be done in rupees, rubles, or yuan. Russia has no need for USD anymore, so they are forcing their buyers to de-dollarize. And because Moscow is a big commodity giant trying to weaponize the financial system, will backfire. It's not just the global south that will move away from the dollar, even Western countries would be affected as well. And just a week ago, Germany actually blocked sanctions on Russian gas. The German economy is still in tatters and they still need Russian energy to function. Imports from Norway or the US aren't nearly enough. Going forward, Europe will be forced to de-dollarize as well or face US secondary sanctions. And the amount they are buying isn't small. Russia has overtaken the US as a major gas supplier to Europe again. You would think that Europe has cut Russian supply off, but that is far from reality. LNG is expensive and pipeline gas is much cheaper. If Europe wants to reshore industrial production back home, if they want to build cheaper EVs, they can't avoid Russian gas. Since the middle of 2023, Europe has been buying more Russian gas. Supply accounts for 15% of EU's total supply, while US LNG has dropped. Shipping gas from halfway around the world suddenly seems to be very expensive, doesn't it? So how's Europe going to pay for Russian gas today? Yuan or rubles only? Euros will be useless for transactions going forward. And this is an epic own goal that undermines demand for Western currencies. The euro is not as resilient as the dollar. It is not the reserve currency of the world. Demand for the euro will also drop, and this will lead to more inflationary pressures for Europe. The big worry now is China's response. Setting up an alternative system is almost guaranteed. Firstly, the era of China buying US bonds is done, that is over. Whatever surplus Beijing gets will be either to buy commodities directly or to buy production facilities around the world. Since the war started, China has been exporting their investment capital to the world very aggressively. Every quarter, China spends at least $50 billion to buy up assets around the world. It can be buying copper mines in Peru, lithium mines in Australia, or developing oil fields in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Chinese response will be to buy up physical infrastructure that generates oil, gas, and metals for them. They are not leaving their dollars in the system outside of their control, and that means no more treasury bonds or US agency debt. It's simply too risky at this point. A few days back, Yellen also put China on blast. She's telegraphing the punch to everyone that the next target will likely be smaller Chinese banks. And these are the banks they are playing whack-a-mole with the US. A Beijing university recently published a report about how China can bypass the sanctions. It's as simple as using and setting up smaller banks. It's exactly what the US is now targeting. They kinda know sanctioning a big Chinese bank is essentially a declaration of war. Global supply chains will break almost instantly. So the next best move is to play whack-a-mole with the smaller banks, but it simply won't work. America's big problem today is how divided the world is. Because of the Ukraine war and the Gaza war, a lot of countries are tired of jumping through their hoops. Nations they've all seen the effects of Western sanctions. They simply lead to high inflation for their economies. And when a new alternative financial system comes into play, we can expect the major powers to jump on board. They want to continue trading with Russia and, of course, China. The Ukraine Peace Summit is a perfect example of how divided the world truly is. If Yellen sanctions China, not everyone will be on board the idea. Saudi Arabia, for one, is thinking independently outside of the West.
Any credible process will need Russia's participation. We hope the outcomes of this summit reflect those aims. Thank you.
As you heard from the Saudi Foreign Minister, the opinions of Russia and China are important, especially in matters that concern them. Peace talks, for example, without the other participant, which is Russia, is a pointless exercise. The signing of the joint communique for the summit also tells us everything we need to know. India, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, Indonesia, amongst others, and the UAE did not sign the document. Brazil didn't sign it either. Russia and China, of course, didn't attend. All of the BRICS countries rejected the Western framework of peace. This is a big signal of a bifurcated world. Yellen imposing sanctions on global banks will get enormous pushback from these countries as well, 100%, especially when their own economies are on the line. Trying to break Russia through financial sanctions is a risky move that will backfire. They are too big of a commodity producer to be contained. It will only damage the petrodollar's reputation and force countries to transact in other currencies. Ironically, the big winner of this today will be the Chinese yuan. But let me know what you think. Did Yellen make a big mistake here? And is the petrodollar doomed? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.